with everyone.
Lavin, and I am from Bloomberg Philanthropies, and I lead the local infrastructure hub on behalf of Bloomberg Philanthropies. Thank you for joining us for the 94th of these sessions, which is crazy. We'll have big balloons and celebrations when we get to 100. The local infrastructure hub is, as many of you know, is a collaboration between the philanthropic community and national stakeholders like the U.S. Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities, and Results for America to bring together municipalities to apply for federal funding coming from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. We know that there have been a lot of changes in the last 6 months that implicate those funding sources, and we are here to continue to provide you with information on how where there are opportunities to continue to seek money for your projects to be ambitious and bold, and to make sure that for those projects that were awarded funds, they continue wherever possible. And so I'm glad that you're all tuning in, and we plan on continuing a robust schedule of programming to help you in these efforts. Through the hub, city and town leaders have accessed grant application, training support, tailored implementation workshops, one-on-one office hours, and lots of resources that are provided and created by experts like many of those you'll hear from today. With the enactment of HR 1, we know that federal funding cuts and federal funding priorities are shifting, and that city and town grant management teams are trying to stay abreast of what are now accelerated timelines to apply for some of these funds. And so we really do encourage you to seek out help, and we'll be putting lots of resources in the chat if you need someone to talk to be able to figure out how you can still access clean energy tax credits or funding that remains available. Today, session is going to focus on developing a long-range plan for your community so you can advance a shared vision and goals for years to come. I'd like to welcome our first speaker and a frequent local infrastructure hub collaborator, Mary Ellen Wiederwall, who is the president and CEO of Accelerator for America, which is a national organization that works to leverage infrastructure development to create life-changing careers in construction trades and professional services, drive small business procurement opportunities, strengthen and connect communities, and create generational wealth. Mary Ellen will be providing an overview on long-range planning and its benefits as a tool that helps guide investment, align community vision, and weather political and economic shifts. She'll also moderate our mayoral panel, which will include Mayor of Dubuque, Iowa, Brad Cavanagh, and Mayor of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Monroe Nichols. So Mary Ellen, thank you so much for your partnership, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Jamie. Great to be with everybody, and happy Tuesday afternoon. I should say good afternoon. I think everybody in this call may have escaped the morning unless we have someone from Hawaii or Alaska on. Good morning. It's good to be with all of you all. Accelerator for America is proud to be part of the local infrastructure hub. Over the last several years, we've been providing case stories and resource guides that hopefully have helped you figure out which grants you want to pursue and to see how your fellow leaders in cities across the country are doing the work so you can see in them what you can provide for your communities. Many of you know I'm a City Hall alum from my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, so it's a great joy to be with you. And as they say, I feel your pain. So great to get kicked off this afternoon. I hope you all have taken a look at the resource that we're going to be talking about today called Planning Ahead, Long-Range Planning for Success. We could probably all share a good joke about the amount of planning that cities do. We have shelves and closets full of plans and binders of plans and dreams of different decades, departments, and times. We do a lot of planning. We decided collectively to pursue this long-range planning resource as part of the hub because of the times that we're in, and knowing that there are some things that maybe we're not going to be able to get done right now, but we start to lay the groundwork today for the opportunities we might have in the coming years. And so because we have a good habit of planning, let's talk about how we can do some great planning as communities for things that may actually come down the road for future leaders. And in fact, that's an interesting segue to the leaders we have with us today. Mayor Cavanagh and Mayor Nichols are both implementing long-range plans that they themselves were not involved in the development with. They happened before they were mayor, and now they are the ones taking these plans into implementation, into their next iteration, and starting to run that continuous improvement cycle of what's working and here, what we can do more with going forward. Long-range plans are so very valuable for a community. They can help set an investment plan for the future. We know how expensive these infrastructure investments are, so we need a good long-range view of what we're going to be buying. What are we going to be building? How much is it going to cost? And how are we going to build that complicated capital stack to get it done? Long-range planning is a wonderful way to engage the community. We're going to talk more about that. These communities both have great and different stories about how they reached out to people, how they built trust, and how they got some great ideas from the folks who live in the communities who will benefit from these plans. A great opportunity to use our data capacity. What does the data tell us about what our needs are? How does the qualitative fit with the quantitative? And where is there conflict that we need to talk about what the community is saying they see, they want, they feel, and what the data is telling us about what's actually going on? And then, of course, we think about all the different kinds of plans. And so this long-range planning resource is not specific to a particular kind of plan. Mayor Cavanagh is going to talk about what is their comp plan. Mayor Nichols is going to share stories from the implementation of a very discrete neighborhood area plan around a specific set of development priorities. We all have strategic multimodal plans, vision plans, comp plans, neighborhood plans. All of those could fit into what we're talking about today when we think about longer range and how these plans really guide the decisions that we will make today and for years in the future. So with that, I would like to turn to our mayors to have them introduce in a couple of minutes the plans that we are talking about. Mayor Cavanagh, this is an interesting fun fact, is the fourth elected mayor, popularly elected mayor of Dubuque. He was letting me know that for many years, the city council there elected the mayor. So they have a long line of mayors from Dubuque, but he is running for his second term right now. He sat on the city council before this and has a background as a small business owner and social worker. Mayor Cavanagh, tell us a little bit about your plan there in Dubuque.
Well, sure. Well, Mary Ellen, thank you very much for having me. And it's great to see everybody here today. Mayor Nichols, nice to see you again. Glad to be doing this with you. So, yeah, the plan that I'm here to talk about is what we call our Imagine Dubuque plan. So this was actually developed in 2016, 2017. I'm going to start with a real quick story that our city manager likes to tell. He's been city manager for about 30 years, and he said one of the first things he did was ask, where's the comprehensive plan? And he was directed to his office, and he walked in there, pulled off a plan off the shelf that was made in 1936. So the most recent plan before this one for Debuke was actually from 1995, shortly after he became city manager. And then this process of going through and creating this new comprehensive plan happened in the 2016 to 2018 period. It's interesting because I was running for city council during that time. So it was kind of a part of my run was learning about this and being a part of these events as a resident of Dubuque. So what happened here was we got community input from about 6,000 individuals, and they came up with over 12,000 ideas of things that they wanted to see in Dubuque. And it was just a lot of community engagement, a lot of community input. A lot of it was based on the fact that Dubuque went through a really tough time back in the 1980s. So we were part of we got hit hard by the farm crisis. We have John Deere Construction and Forestry headquarters here in Dubuque, and that and a meat packing plant were kind of our whole economy at the time. And when the bottom fell out from that, it was really figuring out how to regrow from that point. So it's a huge part of our history. It's a big scar that we bear here in Dubuque. And growing that population over time, over these years, and then diversifying our economy was really one of the main, I would say, centerpieces of what this plan really was. So that's the overview, but it's really, we're trying to make a viable, livable, equitable community here in Dubuque. That's one of the things that we really strive to do. So this plan is helping us to do that.
Wonderful. We're going to talk a lot more about several of those items you brought up there. Mayor Nichols, good to see you. When I asked Mayor Nichols about his bio, he said, just call me 41st.
That's right. That's all we need.
He is the 41st mayor of Tulsa, recently elected. background as a state legislature member, and he has a professional career that I'm going to describe as living at the intersection of government, nonprofit, philanthropy, and private sector. So he's done a lot of cool stuff before he had public titles as well. So Mayor Nichols, you are now implementing a very important plan there in Tulsa for the Kirkpatrick Heights, Greenwood area, and a focus around specific development priorities. Tell us a little bit more about this long-range plan.
Yeah, so thank you for having me on. And we got some folks from Partner Tulsa who are also on. These are all the folks who have been there from start to finish here. So as we get into a discussion, Renita, Gretchen, Gary, or Cayenne, we talked about me phoning a friend. I might do that. But this is such a cool project within our community. And Mayor Cavanagh, good to see you again. Saw you in Tampa. Hope everything's going well for you. Happy to help anytime I can. Want to make sure I get that out of the way. But it is certainly great to see you. And it's always great to engage with mayors and city leaders on issues impacting our citizens. To me, this is one of the coolest projects ever. A lot of folks may know a little bit about the Greenwood story. The Greenwood district was kind of a city within a city here in Tulsa pre-1921. Lots of folks across the country know about the Tulsa Race Massacre, which essentially destroyed 1,300 homes and businesses, and essentially took that away, right? And it's well documented now, but for about 70 years, wasn't talked about a lot. For the 30 years after that, there was a lot of conversation about, should be anything done about it? How do you do anything about it? And this master plan is in some ways a culmination of not necessarily all those old recommendations, but really more so the hopes of a community. And I got to say, the folks at Partner Tulsa who have worked to bring this to life, they've engaged over 1,000 residents. It's been part of a 16-month process to plan how do you bring mixed-use development, how do you bring affordable housing, how do you create jobs and economic opportunity, including places where people can connect with green spaces and cultural preservation, all those things. Almost like if we could imagine those 56 acres, which this is the footprint of this plan, if we could imagine it uninterrupted from the 1920s to today. And so bringing that back in our day and time right now to be 104 years since the massacre, now having conversations how do we implement a master plan for this generation of Tulsans, for descendants who have been part of this community, and putting it back in the hands of folks within the community with the Greenwood Legacy Corporation, which is a community development corporation. I think it's been another cool aspect of this, literally giving it back to the community and allowing them to be in the driver's seat as to what happens on those 56 acres. I think it's great for our economy for sure. But I think when you think about how do you develop in a culturally sensitive way that's forward looking, but also being very respectful of the past, that is the Kirkpatrick Heights Greenwood Master Plan. I'm very proud of it.
And what an honor you get to implement it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And to pick up the hard work and carry the baton around the track the next lap.
That's right.
Well, staying on the community engagement theme, Mayor Cavanagh, as we're researching your plan, we're really impressed with the number of residents you engaged. Dubuque is about 60,000 people, I think.
Yep, that's correct.
And you had 6,000 residents input. That's a great number. You didn't get 10% on that kind of scale is pretty amazing. But we also know when we engage the community, we get both practical ideas and aspirational ideas. As I was thinking about this, we can all think of the aspirational ones. When we were doing the Vision Louisville process in Louisville, we kind of blew the doors off and said, give us your big crazy ideas. And someone wanted to put a zip line across the Ohio River. I don't know, that would be fun. You've got zip line developers, apply here. But talk to us about how you got that amazing amount of community engagement, but then how do you parse that out into a plan so that the majority of the community says, yeah, they heard me?
Yeah, those are great questions. And by the way, a zip line sounds fantastic. I would love to do that across the Mississippi right here. We could reach Wisconsin and Illinois with a zip line going in two directions. That'd be a lot of fun. Part of it, and this sounds silly when we talk about planning all the time, because you mentioned this yourself, there's always the extra planning and you hire consultants and you do more plans, but we really did plan for the plan. So there was the consultant that was hired to be able to come up with the actual engagement plan that we were going to have, which I think, looking back on this, it was before my time, but when you look back on that process, I think it was a really smart idea, because we had the ability to be able to come up with what kind of tools we're going to use, what types of events are we going to have, what types of people do we want to talk to, and essentially, if we want to get to everybody, how do you get to everybody? So it really came down to being able to focus most on meeting people where they are, rather than asking people to just keep coming to community events that we as a city were going to plan. You go to where people are. One example is we have a very active farmers market here that happens every single Saturday all throughout the summer. And then there's also a winter's market that's a little bit smaller, but the farmers market's a huge draw, covers multiple city blocks. And I remember when I was a resident at the time and seeing this plan taking shape, I would go down to the farmers market and there would be people there. And I think I even got included in it when you said, what's your big idea? And you hold it up and you do a selfie with your big idea, and then they post that on everything. And those types of engagements were, I think, something that everybody got to see. So even if you didn't take part in that activity, you still saw that the city was reaching out to the community to ask for these ideas. So that's one great example. But then there's other very traditional ideas, having focus groups, having community meetings. And then as you go through this time, over time, what the city did was actually you whittle down the ideas, but then you also you have the types of events that are going to draw people in to talk about how those things are taking shape as you start to funnel things a little bit more. So I remember going to a meeting late in the process when we were getting close to the unveiling of the plan, and you had multiple community partners there and we'll talk more about partnerships too in this conversation, but you have all these people who are stakeholders that are helping to drive the process. And it wasn't just driven by the city government and the city employees themselves. So I would say there were quite a few ways that the city was able to reach out to quite a few people.
No shortage of channels to engage people. Jamie's put a nice note in the chat asking people to share your stories, particularly now that so much occurs on social media. The role of traditional media has declined. A lot of people get their news from podcasts. And so how are you at the local level engaging community and reaching out through all of those new and differentiated channels? Mayor Nichols, in your story, in this narrower group, this was a very long engagement process, and it was more about trust building, and you were headed towards a community-led governance model. Tell us a little bit more about what that looked like, the time it took, and what was different in this case than a more traditional broad-based community engagement effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think, they say all partnerships and communities move at the speed of trust. And I think within that, the important lesson to know is like trust building on the front end does not mean that you don't do it in the middle. It does not mean that you don't have to do it all the way through the end and beyond. Particularly in a project like this, where you're dealing with something that's so personal to a lot of folks' identity, right? And so it's not generally doing a comprehensive plan, which is great. And those processes are amazing. And that's critical that you get as much input as possible. It's also like where you get input, but then you also have to make sure that whatever people say is also a responsible way in which you develop this area, right? Like which, maybe that's different if you do a comprehensive plan versus doing it in this case. And so I think on the trust building side, it's like not only how are you engaging, but who you're engaging. So, do you have enough folks who were descendants who draw their history from that? But you also want to make sure you have this influx of new voices that, represent the future of it. And so how do you do that balance and that dance? And I really appreciate listening to Mayor Cavanagh talk about the numerous ways in which you have to engage. So I think that's such a big part of it. And the challenge on the back end is okay, we've done public meetings and workshops. We've done surveys and platforms. We've had these one-on-one conversations. We've done these engagement events. We've done all this stuff. How do we distill what we've heard to make sure it can come out on the back end and be reflective of all those voices, given that we've heard them in so many different ways? And I give a lot of credit to the team at Partner Tulsa, because you do that. And then it's then we're also going to try to go into this different governance structure for this over the long haul. So the interesting thing about it, and I think this is a challenge that we still are working through in a lot of ways, is you can get that 80 or 90% right. The 10% left to do still is really difficult to do. It doesn't make the last 10% any easier. And I think that's been the dynamic thing about this, because everybody agrees. There's very little disagreement about the engagement that's happened. There's very little disagreement about what the master plan looks like. And there's a lot of excitement about it. And then it's okay, but who's going to be in charge? Well, the community. Well, then now you recognize that part of the community doesn't think the rest of the community is. And so you get to that last, 10, 20, maybe even last 5%. And you realize you now have to also lean into that part to restore that. And I think the big thing, and I think we all learned this in city government, Mary Ellen, I know you as a veteran of a mayor's office get this, and Mayor Cavanagh having been on the council and mayor for a while. I think we all understand you can't take it personal. The community is almost always right. It's like the customer's always right, and finding ways that you can both validate how people are feeling, but also encourage them to move forward, I think has been like an interesting balance and interesting dance that we all have to do. And so I think it's really interesting in this case. Like it's like it's personal to everybody, which sometimes makes it a little bit different than a broader plan because everybody's very hyper focused on 56 acres. But I think it's gone well, but it's tough. Trust is tough. Trust is incredibly tough.
It is. You're reminding me of a couple stories. At one point during a difficult time, someone said to me, "It's not personal, it's business."
Yeah.
When you're in government, like, it's business. You're like, oh, wait. So I wrote that on a sticky note and I had it sitting in front of me for a while because one of the reasons we do this work is we care. We care so much. But then there are moments you got to remember this isn't personal. This isn't about me. I just happen to be in positional authority. So I'm gonna take that. And I've watched such great leaders in community engagement, sit in community meetings and really just be yelled at, and they'll bob their head and say yes. And then they'll say, "Gosh, I'm so glad you asked that question." It's
Yeah,
the most
right.
amazing diffusing moment. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And the person is immediately validated, even if it's the craziest thing you've ever heard. But this is why we listen.
Right.
It's really valuable. And Mayor Nichols, I want to come back to you on the trust side, where you said
Yeah.
you don't do it once, you don't check a box. It's the trust building that occurs throughout. One of the other challenges we often face is that the squeaky wheels get a lot
Right.
of the attention. You got any tricks for how to manage through that and how you make sure that 90+% of people who are aligned are really the ones heard and we're governing to them?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that like we're dealing with this in a real way right now in a lot of ways. And I won't get it and I won't put it out in front of everybody all the time, but I do think part of it is like sometimes asking people, okay, what is it that you want? Like, are you just frustrated about something, or is there actually something that you want? Because there's also a part of this where even a minority voice could be bringing something to the table that could have been overlooked. We could have a blind spot or whatever the case may be. And so again, it's like there's some validation of, okay, like what's your challenge? How would you have us to address that challenge? And so you can pressure test some of the criticism, because I think that's really important. The worst thing that can happen is for people to be frustrated about something and they can say that you never met with them about it, right? And so we don't want to make that mistake. But the trust part of it is oftentimes we all work in government and we all probably have our own stories of government letting us down in some way, shape, or form, or this big effort that didn't happen. And so we got to recognize people that we're talking to are having that same thing. So even us validating and meeting and spending the time up front to do it, I think is in and of itself a reflection that things are a little bit different. Right. And it's harder for us, I will admit. But it's work that ultimately makes the finished product a little bit better. And so it is true. It took a lot of trust in the front part. I guarantee if we asked the partner Tulsa folks who are on the call, they may say those first few meetings were really, really tough to even get people to buy into a plan that the city was thinking about doing, right? Like, so there was that. Prove that together, we can get that plan done. Oh, that's a big deal. But the trust went as far as the plan went. Now we're on to the next part and the next part and the next part. And so it's this continual effort in hearing from people, getting their input, delivering, and then going on to the next thing, and then making sure we're continuing to strengthen our relationships that we've sped past. And so I think that's been a really big part of it. It's the reason why it takes 16 months or 24 months or 36 months, and it doesn't take a meeting for an hour. Because like I would love to say, hey, just trust us. We got an awesome plan. We'll start spending next year. But my predecessor, Mayor Bynum, put $5 million to help the implementation and last improve our Tulsa package. And so like there was also this effort where it's reflective, not just in the support we got from the outside, but the city said, we will put real dollars in here and we will dedicate staff capacity to doing it. And they will take you through a process different than others. And on the back end, we're going to make sure that this is returned back to the community. And so we're just going through that phase. And it's like I said, every stop of the way is a trust check-in is what maybe we can call them.
It's not a checkbox, it's a check-in. All
That's it.
right. Credit to Mayor Nichols. Well, you started to mention there funding the plan. And of course, that's part of the focus of the local infrastructure hub is to help our local communities access the funds that are available. There are still plenty of federal dollars that are flowing that we're going after, but there are also other sources as well. Mayor Cavanagh, you inherited this plan. It's a big plan across your entire community. How has having this plan and the way you all blew it out past a traditional comp plan helped you procure resources from all sources?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think part of the process of this plan, or part of the benefit of having a comprehensive plan in place, is that you have a guidepost for everything else that you're doing. So we, I'll bring up our city manager again, because he says, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And we always have, every single year we do a goal setting session as a city council. And I think this is one of the most important things that we do, along with actually setting our budget every single year. And those happen at sort of opposite ends of a year. And when we do this goal setting session, the language that we use and the things that we talk about are absolutely coming from the comprehensive plan. It's all tied together. So we always talk about these strategic plans that you complete and then you set on a shelf and nobody talks about it anymore. Nobody looks at it. All the priorities change and shift week by week. That's not the way it really works in the city of Dubuque, because we annually go back 2 times a year and talk about this. And that really helps us to stay very focused on the things that we need. The priorities for what you need to procure, the types of resources you need to go after, they do change sometimes fairly quickly. A great example is we had a situation where all of a sudden we realized we needed an overpass over a railroad, and we needed it pretty quickly. So we really needed to go after a raise grant that we were able to get last year. But we didn't have that, and that wasn't on the radar for the Imagine Dubuque plan. So the fact that we had the plan, though, that said these are the types of needs that we have, this is the process that we go through, that's the type of thing that has really helped to guide us as we go through these different steps every single year of setting goals and then setting a budget around those goals. And I think it helps with the transparency too, because that's another complaint that people have that goes back to the trust factor that Mayor Nichols is talking about. This idea of not being transparent enough, not being open enough. If you're constantly talking about these things and you're constantly bringing them up, and it's just a part of the language that we use, and your partners are using it as well, that's really where I think a lot of that trust is built around that type of transparency.
I don't know if we lost Mary Ellen, but Mayor, when you were talking, just in case we did, I was thinking, that what you were describing is like, this rapid cycle of accountability. So it's like, hey, we said we're going to do this, and we're going to do our part, and we're going to continue to show you're going to do our part. And it sounds like a lot of the trust building, as you described it, is, hey, we said we're going to do a thing, we did a thing, so you can kind of verify it, and then, the transparency piece is that if I tell you next week that I'm going to get something done, I don't do it. Well, I didn't do it when I said I was going to do it. But if I say I'm going to do it, just let's move forward and let me prove you wrong in some ways. And so I appreciate that level of accountability that you were just talking about. I think that's such a powerful piece of it.
Yeah.
And I know Mary Ellen's power is going off and on. So Mary Ellen, feel free to wave us when you get your power back. But I think just starting to think about what Mary Ellen started to tease was that there are, some sources of federal funding that have been available to help move these plans forward. Some of those remain, some of those are going away. How are you thinking about scenario planning around how to now implement the plan and what funding sources are available for that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll maybe get started a little bit, and I even have maybe some of the partner Tulsa folks at some point, might even bring them in, maybe not right now, but maybe a little bit. But I think about this as I think about being an implementer. The first thing I think about is certainly what are the opportunities federally that might exist for us to be able to support. But I also believe, part of the accountability deal, at least in our context, is, the city, this happened in our city. The city didn't do the things it should have done in the past. And so the city has to have a lot of skin in the game as to what we do moving forward, for example. And so that's one of the reasons why in our Improve Our Tulsa package this last time, which went out to a vote of the people, there was money set aside for the planning around the master plan. It's the reason why we've really thought about this. How do you transfer ownership to the land so that the investment moving forward begins to circle the community and circulate the community like it did prior to the massacre? How are we thinking about our long range infrastructure plans at the city? So as we're thinking about, where we're putting things under the ground, is that aligned to the master plan? So some of what we've thought about, in addition to thinking about those federal sources, is actually, how has this master plan impacted what we do every day and how we're preparing parts of the community for the kind of development that we want to see in Kirkpatrick Heights? And so I think sometimes, like, thinking about federal sources of money, which you have to be aggressive about going and getting. I want to be clear, like, don't write those things off, obviously you can't do it without it. But I do think there's a certain level of looking in the mirror and figuring out, like, hey, this is important to this community. How are we going to build the support, and how we're going to change our internal practices and make sure it's reflective of this is something that we want to do, and we're gonna make sure all of our boats are going in that direction. And so, like, for me, as I think about this master plan in particular, I do think about how are we behaving differently at the city that's allowing us to make some of those investments. How are we thinking about rolling that into our capital plans, and then kind of a maybe in partnership with that, or maybe even second to that, what are the federal resources that are out there that are going to help us stack on top of the things that we're doing ourselves, so we can show that folks in this community know that the city also recognizes we have a role, and this is not going to happen just because there's a federal grant, or it's not going to happen because there is no federal money, right? So some of that's been a little bit of looking in the mirror for me.
Well, ironic as we're talking about infrastructure that I get kicked off of my internet connection. It completely resets. I actually lost power here briefly. We had a minor
That
storm.
was pretty quick. The infrastructure's doing pretty well. I mean, got back on pretty quick. I think that's pretty good.
It's interesting how we compare these things now, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, you can tell I've been a mayor now. I'm like, oh, no, that was bad. That was great.
Great. Fabulous. You were off for like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jamie. Thanks for everybody rolling with it. And yeah, I love the conversation I got to pick back up into here about how the sources, may change, but you've got to have commitment at all levels. And whether you're going after federal grant or you're going to partner with the state, you've got the local. Tulsa is blessed with a really nice philanthropic community, and so there's a nice set of things you can pursue there for any community of any size. There's new opportunities to reach out to philanthropy to set a new path forward as we go through a more austere period of time in the coming years, less grants to pursue. So, speaking of things that aren't going well. We learn more from things that don't happen the way we expect them to, learn more from failure than success sometimes. Mayor Cavanagh, you're finishing up your first term, hopefully gonna ride to easy victory for a second term, but I'm sure it hasn't been all wine and roses here with implementation. So tell us what lessons you've learned along the road the last few years.
Yeah, a lot of it is the conversation that we're kind of already having. And I think I'll stick with the partnership topic on that one, because, it kind of goes back to the last question. With the way that other levels of government are going to work is going to ebb and flow, and sometimes with you and sometimes against you. So, sometimes you can turn towards the federal government and have some resources there that are going to be ready to go, and there's something you can access and the timing is right. Sometimes that's not the case. So maybe you turn towards your state government as a partner to be able to help. Sometimes you don't have either of those options really readily accessible to you. And I think what I'm recognizing in my role now is the importance of the local partnerships in being able to carry forward a plan, even when you don't have readily accessible resources in the terms of any sort of financial resources or things that are going to make it maybe easier for you to make a plan like this a reality. So, when you have a comprehensive plan like this that you want to create, I think the strength of the partnerships that you have in the community is probably the number one first step that you really need to make sure that you have squared away. If you have weak partnerships between your city government and your nonprofit organizations or economic developments and chamber organizations, if you don't have those partnerships in place, then you're going to be trying to force this plan on people, and you're not going to have buy-in from some of the major leaders in the community. It's important to get 6,000 different people to come forward and say what they think should be in a comprehensive plan, but it's also very, very important to make sure that the leaders within the community are the ones that are buying in and going to be working with you to do this. So I've learned that the strength of those partnerships is incredibly important. They are oftentimes fragile. They require almost daily work. And I think that as an elected official, I think it's really important that not only do we sit on the boards of these different organizations and work with them, but that we are working hand in hand to make sure that we have the same goals in mind. We share the same vision, and we want to be able to push that forward. And what that allows is, in a situation like we're in right now, I mentioned this medical school that is starting in Dubuque, and the fact that we have all these great things that are happening. A lot of the reason that we're able to keep pushing forward is that we also in Dubuque have a very strong philanthropic just mentality, and a lot of different organizations that are ready to take up the torch and run when the city government can't necessarily do it in the same way. So it's actually, I think those partnerships are one of the things that stick in my mind as one of the more important lessons that I've taken away from my time as mayor.
Mayor Nichols, you've just been in office a few months. I know it probably feels like years, and it's both flying by. But earlier in your term, you announced your Road to Repair initiative. And it, to me, reflects what has been a lot of time Tulsa has spent staring in the mirror and looking at itself and thinking about where do we go from here. How are you weaving your new initiative into the work that's already been done?
Yeah, I mean, some of it kind of goes back to that trust building part. Like when we announced the Greenwood Trust, it was not necessarily intended to be countered to anything that had happened before. It was very direct to things that descendants specifically said they wanted the city to do. What it serves as now is an opportunity to partner if that's a good pathway for things, or to operate as a real support of what's going on in the master plan right now. What has been interesting about coming into office, I think this is true anytime we come into office, with all the good or the bad things, and usually it's a mix of both, but end of the day, more positive than negative. And so this was no different. There's been years and years and years of people really thinking through what's the most appropriate way in which we move forward as a community. And I think right now we have this trust, which is a private charitable trust that is designed to invest in economic development and education and affordable housing and cultural landmarks. And then we have this master plan that calls for very similar things, but they can be, supports to each other. And that's the great hope as we move forward. I mean, I think, one of the lessons that I'm starting to learn is that when you're doing this work, the role of a mayor is really making sure that you hold people together, like Mayor Cavanagh was just describing. And outside of that, you kind of got to get out of the way and let experts do what they do, and there's these processes don't come without some rough spots. And whether that's, the business community is not quite there yet, or a portion of the community feels left out, or, we've tried this before and this isn't going to work, whatever that might be, our job is to hold all that together and give folks the opportunity maybe that they hadn't had before to help a plan work, to give it a shot. And then when they run into a brick wall, to show up and do what you can to remove it. And so I think, like, for me, part of it's having the right people there. Part of it's having a really solid plan, but our role a lot of times is to just be a person that's willing to be accountable, willing to take some of the bows and arrows and that kind of stuff, but champion in a plan, because there's going to be some valleys. It's going to be an amazing peak on the back end, but there's going to be some valleys, and unfortunately, for Mayor Cavanagh and I and everybody else, mayors often spend a lot of time in a few valleys. And the good news is, for mayors, we also get to spend a lot of time on peaks. Usually it's the other person's peaks and, it's our own valleys, but yeah, I don't know how that works. But that's what it's been. It's really about figuring out how do we pull all these things together so that this community is not just one that looks to the past for inspiration, but one that we can look out of our window and see right now.
Oh, that's beautiful. And yes, there are lots of peaks and valleys. Some days it feels like more valleys, but yes,
Sometimes you can't tell the difference between the two.
There are a lot of two-sided coins in this business, for sure. Well, we were joking earlier about the amount of planning that our cities do, and Mayor Cavanagh, you're a little further into this, that there can become planning fatigue, and you took all those 6,000 people out, and then it's a few years in, and like, hey, what happened to that thing we said we were going to do?
Yeah.
How do you keep the energy and the momentum going? We know about quick wins, and we like to communicate. What are some of your tricks of the trade?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of it is making sure that people know where the plan sits. So you actually have to have some sort of reporting mechanism to say this is how we're doing on this. And luckily, we actually plan for that and do have something like that for the Imagine Dubuque plan. We actually got some software. It's called Achieve It software that keeps track of this for us. But part of it is you can't just put this in one person's lap or in one organization's lap. And from from our city itself, we actually have multiple different directors that are in charge of different portions of the plan. So, we have people that are really the champions that carry things forward from each of the different goals that we've set or the different things that have been identified within the plan. And when you have that all diversified in that way, and you have plenty of people that are the ones that are the stakeholders and buying into this, then you have this collective energy that actually pushes things forward, and that includes your community partners. A good chunk of the goals within the Imagine Dubuque plan are actually led by community partners outside of city government. And when you have that, it's harder to lose the momentum if you have multiple people that are marching forward all together. You really have this ability to be able to carry each other in those places. So I think that's part of it, is just having that buy-in and having those exciting things happening. And the other piece that's really important is you got to share the glory too. I know we're talking peaks and valleys, but this can't be about making sure that it's always the feather in your own cap. Even if that is as city government or as one elected official or another community leader, it needs to be something that's about the process and the product, and not about the glory that one person or one entity gets. And I think that's helpful when you have all these different people that are a part of this and that really do have a stake in the process. I think it helps to make sure that everybody recognizes that this is more of a community impact than it is for one individual person or group.
Mayor Nichols, I get the sense from folks I've talked to in Tulsa that there is a wide commitment to the reality that you're on a marathon endurance race, that people know this is a long haul, that the things you're doing in this master plan are reversing decades of things that happened and deliberate decisions there. But how are you keeping folks' chins up and thinking about how this weaves through your first term?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the big part about it is always reminding folks of why you're doing it in the first place,
The why.
and not getting too bogged down about something you might be frustrated about in the moment, and to remind people about the opportunity that we have, which is actually different than any opportunity that anybody who lives in the city has had before us since 1921. And so if you can internalize that there's an opportunity that exists right now, it probably makes, maybe a short term kind of, are we going in the right direction, a lot less impactful, right? And so a lot of it is that, right? A lot of it's just a constant reminder as to why we show up and do what we're doing, and what the possibility is if we get this right, or no, excuse me, what's going to happen when we get it right. So just remove any possibility, because there's a possibility that it doesn't work out, but just remind people the vision and the why. And I think that's the most powerful thing, particularly within kind of an area plan like this versus a comprehensive plan. You can get people on the why in the same ways in which you might also play on some of the fears from the past, which I think for me, that's been the big deal.
Well, we've enjoyed this discussion, and we have time now for some Q&A with the folks who are joining in with us. Would anybody like to ask a question or put a new question in the chat? Or Jamie, do you have any that contribute into the discussion? I see one hand up. Richard Diaz, I see your hand. Do you have a question?
I do, and much appreciation to you, Mary Ellen, and the two mayors for this great webinar. I am curious if either of your cities have experience in deploying a Dig Once initiative that mandates or encourages the partnerships between different utilities in the right of way to perform joint construction projects. You know, oftentimes in residential spaces, people are like, my road was open up, so they repaved the road. Next year, my road was open up, so they did the lead service line. The next year, they did the gas utility. So, just curious from your perspective, do you have any experience in that?
So
Lots
that's
of head nodding.
yeah. So that's actually, if you talk about a frustration that people have here, is why is my road torn up? And it's like, it's not us, you know, that type of deal. We've actually started working on that more so now in a more intentional way, just because we have, I mean, between us, cable companies, utility companies, like the road's always torn up. And so it's something we don't have as much experience to date, but it is a number one priority for us actually moving forward around the utilities and the right of way, and really holding not only other companies, but even hold ourselves accountable for making sure we're doing better planning long term with all those utilities, public utilities that have to get in the road. Sometimes unavoidable, but for 80% of it, we could do a much better job.
Yeah. Yeah, and we actually, so a couple quick answers on that. One, I think we are a little bit of a smaller community, and I think it is a little bit easier for us to be able to have that partnership. We can still screw it up too, but I think that for the most part, we do a pretty good job of being able to have those different utilities work together, and be able to just do that project once. If you got a road opened up to be able to do it. Another part of the answer, though, too, is that we did find a really kind of unique way to be able to get fiber to almost every home and business. We are about at 100% of every single home and business having access to fiber internet right now, when we used to only have like 2 internet companies about 10 years ago. And one of the ways we did that is we entered into an agreement with these different companies that were going to be running fiber and running cable, is in that we would share the right-of-way space with them and actually share some of the infrastructure, so that if they're going to go in there and they're going to lay those things down, that we are going to have the city of Dubuque being a part of putting that in the ground, so that we have all the extra space for other companies to go in. And it's sort of it's a cost sharing, but more or less, they were paying for a lot of it, but we were just allowing them the right-of-way much more easily. It's sort of, the simple version is we got rid of the red tape to allow that to happen more quickly. And so that was an interesting partnership to be able to have that from the start, so that there's an agreement that this is the way we're going to be going through and working on all these things. So yeah, hopefully that helps to answer that question.
And maybe just reflecting on one of the questions that Mary Ellen mentioned about the delay between the plan and the culmination, or the work. We addressed this. We had several mayors here, and then their senior leaders here for our Bloomberg Harvard program. We were talking about innovation, and often innovative work is seen as a big mystery, and how do you let people in to start being able to see that, and talked about ways that people are actually using social media now to sort of follow them along, to see what that looks like in practice. Have either of you mayors sort of experimented with that, or other tools? I know Mayor Cavanagh, you talked about the website you're using, but how are you helping people get closer to the work itself?
One of the things that we've been able to have a lot of success with is really just using video and as part of social media to be able to do this. We have a small but very, very mighty communications department that they're extremely talented in being able to put some really great video footage together of different things that are going on. And they're very cognizant when a project is happening that we're going to actually go and take a look at that project and watch it go. On top of that, when I became mayor, I started a video series called Delivering Debuke. And that in collaboration with the communications department. And the whole point was really, well, part of the point was to prove to people that there is a benefit to paying property taxes, because there's a big property tax discussion here in Iowa right now. And I wanted people to see what their investment actually looks like. So the idea was to go to different departments and be able to follow in projects and talk about what the department does, and bring people into city government so they can see what's actually happening. And I think it's hopefully an easy and accessible way of being able to see that. And it also gives us a chance to poke a little fun at ourselves every once in a while. They put me on a scooter one time at the skate park and, talked about that as an investment and that kind of thing. And I think that was, part of really bringing people into the process of what government is and how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for us is just continuing the engagement level. So just because this is such a very specific part down, and the partner Tulsa folks will tell you, just recently they had a large scale community meeting. And so part of this is because we're standing up a new organization to help lead this work long term, like moving it along at the speed that folks are comfortable, right? So there's a part of this where it's like the check-ins are really important, but making sure the check-ins are something has been accomplished over the time that we've been out here working, and then obviously being very open and accessible. The team that's been helping shepherd this process has been incredibly accessible to anybody who's ever participated in the process or anybody who's very interested in it, right? So like it's one of those things where it's not a secret. It's very much in front of folks, but also in a way that like continues to reinforce that the community is driving it, right? So if it's going slow or not as you like it, I think we've even gotten to the point now, which is good and bad, that even it's kind of community on community wiring things happen the way it should, and it's not necessarily so it's almost a self-determination thing, and I think there's something healthy, which is gonna sound really weird. This is one of those, if it's a peak or a valley, where you have people in the community who might be at odds a little bit with each other, but it's because they know that's where the power to get this thing done is derived from, not necessarily the city. So there's actually something really positive within that, and a sign for me that things are going in the right direction, even if it's hard to tell by Facebook comments.
Please do never spend much time on Facebook. Not healthy, not good for our mental health. So we're going to tee up. We'll have a poll here at the end. So you may see that pop up now. So please do that. We always want to know how you liked what we talked about, what we could do better. So please fill out that poll. And I see the 2 questions in the chat. And I also want to go to Renita Wade with Partner Tulsa. Mayor Nichols has referenced Partner Tulsa several times. They were the lead local agency in putting together this particular long-range plan. Renita, tell us what we might need to know when we think about putting this together. What have we not talked about today that you're like, I wish I could get that in from the development experience?
Well, I'd say from our side, sorry, can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for attending. Great to meet you, Mayor Cavanagh, and of course, Mayor Nichols. Thank you for stewarding this project so well. From our side, these things take time. So I would just say that these things take a lot of time. They take a lot of patience. And that's easier said than done. Mayor Nichols highlighted it as well, that we do want things to move along. And especially when we have so many different partners, we're looking at, not only the community, we're looking at the city, we're looking at the larger ecosystem around, and ways to bring in commercial as well. So we do want this to move, but again, we do want it to move at the speed that the community is comfortable with. I think having a diverse group of stakeholders, the area that we're looking at with the plan, it had a vibrant community. And while the massacre happened, another thing that greatly affected the area was the construction of the highway, which really kind of tore apart the community that existed there. And that happened actually maybe like around 40, 50 years later. So there's a lot of these things that we're trying to unravel from, trying to make some progress on. And so I think those contexts are really, really important. So we are looking at, what was originally on that site. So I think capturing the history, knowing exactly what kind of, there was a school there before, and there was a large neighborhood, there were halls, there was pharmacies and all these kind of things. So having that rooting in the history of that area is definitely supporting the work that we're doing. Lastly, I will say that we have been awarded, Partner Tulsa has been awarded a TIFIA grant, which we're really lucky, given everything going on. Our team has worked really hard on that. It's around $990,000 over 3 years, and that grant is going to look at specifically technical analysis, staffing, and helping support the CDC in making decisions for how that land is developed. So I think that type of support that is, while we do have a ton coming from the city and we love it and we have the community, I think that additional grant dollars is really pushing it over the line.
Well, congratulations on the TIFIA grant. There's information about those TIFIA grants in the local infrastructure hub as well. If you want to learn more about that, the IFAC grant, please reach out to us. And I want to give a shout out to Gretchen and Gary and others from the Partner Tulsa team who have been there every step of the way making this real. We've got just a minute, mayors, for some final comments. So a question in the chat about how is the changing budget situation, the retrenchment of federal funds impacting what you're doing? Obviously, what we're saying with this resource is local communities should dig into long-range planning. Don't cut funding for long-range planning. Invest now for a day when there is more opportunity. As we close out with you all, give us 30 seconds on how you're thinking about long-range planning and investment locally going forward. Mayor Cavanagh?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I don't think now is the time to cut your funding away from planning when you can manage it. I think that it's really important that even when times are tight and there's a lot of uncertainty, that our job is to look ahead. Our job is to think about not just the next year and the next 2 years, but the next 20 and 30 years. And in order to do that, you have to invest in something like this. And sometimes when you do that, it puts you in a place to be able to manage things much more efficiently going forward. So I think it's a worthwhile investment even in a moment like this.
Yeah, what I would tell everybody is, I just wrote this down. It's far more expensive when you wait. So I think building the muscles in an emergency is probably not the way to do it. Always being ready and making sure that you constantly have a focus on the North Star is critically important, and it's a ton cheaper. And I think it just is a great way to continue to go back to your community and say, hey, are we continually ensuring that this is the best place to work, to play, to live? So long range planning, I think, is something that you can't divest from. You can't think twice about it. It is the way you build an excellent city for the future. And certainly, I think it's how you build an excellent city for today.
What a great way to take us out. Mayor Nichols, Mayor Cavanagh, city staffs of Dubuque, Tulsa, Partner Tulsa, thank you for everything you've done to share your story with the rest of America's cities and mayors. Jamie, over to you to close us out.
Thank you all so much. Just want to remind everyone that registration is now open for the next round of boot camps and workshops that are really aimed at the areas where federal funding remains available and where we can help you with grant implementation. And so we're really running a boot camp from September through December that's focused on if you've won a federal grant, how can we help you, whether that's getting to a grant agreement, doing an RFP, figuring out the compliance rules. Please sign up if those are any areas that sound like they could be of interest to your team and pass this along. And then we know that there's going to be continued money available for drinking water, for rail crossings, for brownfields, and for safe streets and roads for all. And so we'll be looking really closely at those NOFOs as they come out and providing half-day workshops that will provide you all you need to know to put together competitive applications. If you've applied before, how do they meet the administration's new priorities and criteria? And direct pay, that's an area that was affected by HR 1 or the One Big Beautiful Bill. It has accelerated timelines. It is still available. And so cities, if you are investing in EVs, you have till September 30th to get that EV and put it into service. If you have a solar or a wind project, you're putting some solar panels on your library. This workshop is really going to focus on how do you then go and apply for the tax credit from the IRS, because we know that most cities don't have that experience of having done that kind of paperwork. And so what are the different pieces that you need to pull in to make sure that you get your money back from the federal government? So please sign up. Thank you so much to Mary Ellen and the entire Accelerator for America team for helping to put this together today. Thank you to Mayors Cavanagh and Nichols for your valuable insights. As Mayor Nichols said, we really believe in the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we hope that you were able to take something away, and always reach out to us if there's ways that we can help you. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.